Look at the skyline of modern Istanbul. It is a city defined by the relentless pulse of the 21st century, a massive, sprawling transcontinental hub connecting Europe and Asia. Its streets roar with traffic, its waterways are filled with industrial shipping, and its architecture is a layered mosaic of Ottoman and modern Turkish design. But if we strip away the modern asphalt, erase the Ottoman expansions, and wind the clock back 1,000 years, the city transforms into something entirely different. The year is 1000 AD. The city is Constantinople, and while the western half of the Roman Empire shattered and collapsed beneath the weight of Germanic migrations 5 centuries earlier, plunging Western Europe into a fractured era of localized kingdoms, the Roman Empire did not die. It simply shifted its center of gravity. For 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, Constantinople stood as the undisputed queen of cities. Between 800 and 1100 AD, during the height of the Macedonian dynasty, it was the wealthiest, most heavily fortified, and most sophisticated metropolis in the Christian world. But how did the single city survive centuries of relentless sieges from the Arabs, the Avars, the Bulgars, and the Rus? How did it maintain a thriving, complex economy while Western Europe relied on barter? Today, we will reconstruct the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, its streets, its walls, its palaces, and its people to understand exactly how Constantinople survived while Rome fell. To understand Constantinople's survival, we must first look at its geography and the monumental engineering that amplified it. The city sat on a triangular peninsula. 3 sides were surrounded by water, guarded by treacherous currents and fierce sea walls. But the single landward side was the city's vulnerable underbelly. To solve this, in the 5th century, Emperor Theodosius II commissioned the construction of the most formidable defensive system in human history, the Theodosian Walls. By the year 1000, these walls had repelled over a dozen massive sieges. An invading army approaching Constantinople from the west did not face a simple stone barrier. They faced a devastating, multi-tiered gauntlet of death. First, attackers encountered a massive moat, 20 meters wide and 10 meters deep, which could be flooded through a complex system of hidden pipes. If an army managed to cross the moat under heavy archer fire, they reached a terrace called the Paratekion, backed by the outer wall. This wall stood 8 meters high, interspersed with formidable watchtowers. Should the enemy miraculously breach the outer wall, they found themselves trapped in an enclosed killing zone, facing the inner wall. This was an absolute behemoth of limestone and Roman concrete, rising 12 meters high and nearly 5 meters thick. 96 massive towers protruded from this wall, allowing Byzantine defenders to fire down from interlocking angles. But the walls were only half the equation. The city's survival was equally reliant on a closely guarded state secret, Greek fire. This liquid incendiary weapon, deployed from bronze siphons mounted on the prows of Byzantine warships, ignited upon contact with water and could not be extinguished by it. Between 800 and 1100 AD, Greek fire broke the back of massive naval blockades, ensuring that the city's maritime supply lines remained open even when the land routes were completely cut off. Safe behind these walls, a highly organized urban landscape thrived. Constantinople was deliberately designed as a new Rome. The city was divided into 14 districts, sprawling over 7 hills. If you walk through the city in the 10th century, your journey would likely take you down the Mese, the middle street. This was the primary artery of Constantinople, a 25-meter-wide boulevard paved with massive stone blocks. For much of its length, it was flanked by 2-story covered porticos, allowing pedestrians to shop and travel shielded from the Mediterranean sun and seasonal rains. The Mese connected a series of grand public squares, known as forums. There was the Forum of Theodosius, dominated by a massive triumphal column modeled after Trajan's column in Rome, and the Forum of Constantine, an oval-shaped plaza paved with marble, where the Senate House stood. Unlike the mud and thatch architecture dominating much of Western Europe at this time, Byzantine construction was a direct continuation of classical Roman engineering. Buildings were constructed using bands of red brick interspersed with thick layers of mortar and Roman concrete, a technique that provided immense structural flexibility to withstand the frequent earthquakes that plagued the Marmara region. At the easternmost tip of the peninsula lay the ultimate seat of power, the Great Palace. This was not a single building, but a massive, walled complex spanning nearly 100,000 square meters. It was a labyrinth of administrative buildings, private royal residences, sunken gardens, chapels, and audience halls, lavishly decorated with polychrome marble floors, gold mosaics, and porphyry columns. Constantinople did not just survive. It financed its own survival through absolute economic dominance. Between the 9th and 11th centuries, the city was the undisputed commercial capital of the Mediterranean world, acting as the primary bridge between the wealth of the East and the hunger of the West. The city's strategic location allowed it to control the vital maritime choke point between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Russian traders navigated down the Dnieper River to sell furs, honey, and slaves. Merchants from the Islamic caliphates arrived with spices, perfumes, and precious stones from India and beyond. Italian maritime republics, particularly Amalfi and later Venice, came to purchase the empire's most highly prized export, silk. Since the 6th century, the Byzantines had possessed the secret of silk production, breaking the ancient Chinese monopoly. By the 10th century, silk manufacturing was a tightly controlled state enterprise. The government regulated everything from the quality of the dye to the size of the looms. High-grade purple silk was restricted exclusively for imperial use, giving rise to the phrase, "born in the purple," while other silks were exported at massive profit margins or used as diplomatic bribes to placate foreign kings. Fueling this vast trade network was the Byzantine currency, the nomisma, or solidus. Struck from highly purified gold, the nomisma was so stable and widely trusted that it served as the standard international currency for over 700 years, the medieval equivalent of the US dollar. The state imposed a strict 10% tax on all goods passing through the Bosphorus, funneling staggering wealth directly into the imperial treasury, which in turn paid for the massive armies and fortifications keeping the empire alive. At the heart of this vast economic and military machine was the Byzantine emperor, the basileus. Unlike the feudal monarchs of Western Europe, who relied on the loyalty of semi-independent lords, the Byzantine emperor was an absolute autocrat. He was viewed as God's vicegerent on earth, commanding a highly centralized state. When foreign ambassadors were brought to the capital, they were intentionally subjected to psychological intimidation. According to the 10th century accounts of Liutprand of Cremona, the imperial throne room in the Magnaura was equipped with dazzling mechanical automatons. Bronze lions flanked the throne, rigged to roar and thrash their tails, while a gilded tree housed mechanical birds that sang. As the ambassador bowed face down, a hydraulic mechanism secretly lifted the emperor's throne high into the air, making him appear physically elevated closer to God by the time the diplomat looked up. But beneath the theatrical displays of power lay a highly efficient, literate bureaucracy. The Byzantine Empire functioned because of its civil service. Thousands of trained administrators, tax collectors, logothetes ministers, and scribes managed the logistics of the empire. Fearing the creation of hereditary rival dynasties, the emperors intentionally staffed the highest levels of the civilian and military administration with eunuchs. Because eunuchs could not have children and start their own royal lineages, they were entirely dependent on the emperor's favor, making them incredibly loyal and effective administrators. Furthermore, to maintain order outside the city walls, the empire was divided into military provinces called themata, or themes. Each theme was governed by a strategos general who commanded local, land-owning militias, allowing the empire to mobilize large armies quickly without relying entirely on expensive mercenaries. During the Macedonian Renaissance of the 10th and 11th centuries, Constantinople's population swelled to an estimated 400,000 to 500,000 people. It was a cosmopolitan melting pot of Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, Italians, and Khazars. Society was highly structured. At the top were the senatorial aristocracy and the wealthy merchant class. Below them were the artisans and shopkeepers, whose lives were strictly governed by the Book of the Eparch, a detailed manual of urban regulations. The eparch was the mayor of the city, and through this text, the state controlled the guilds. A baker, for example, was strictly forbidden from doing the work of a butcher. Profit margins were capped, and the locations where specific goods could be sold were rigidly zoned to prevent monopolies and ensure taxation. For the average citizen, the diet was fundamentally Mediterranean, heavily subsidized by the state to prevent riots. Bread was the absolute staple, baked in massive public ovens. This was supplemented by olives, cheese, seasonal vegetables, and fish caught abundantly in the Bosphorus. Meat, particularly pork and mutton, was reserved mostly for feast days. The primary beverage was wine, often watered down and flavored with resin, a practice that survives in modern Greek. Retsina. When citizens were not working, the social and political life of the city revolved around the hippodrome. Capable of holding over 80,000 spectators, this massive U-shaped arena was the site of thrilling chariot races. But it was much more than a sports stadium. The fans were divided into distinct factions, the most powerful being the Blues and the Greens. Over the centuries, these factions evolved from mere fan clubs into organized street gangs, neighborhood militias, and powerful political pressure groups. The hippodrome was the one place where the emperor appeared before the masses, and it was here that the public could collectively voice their grievances, sometimes erupting into violent riots that could threaten the throne itself. No aspect of Byzantine life can be understood without acknowledging the absolute supremacy of religion. Constantinople was the spiritual heart of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. To the Byzantines, their city was uniquely protected by the Virgin Mary. They believed divine providence was the true reason their walls had never fallen. The architectural crown jewel of this faith was the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, built by Justinian in the 6th century. By the year 1000, it remained the largest indoor space in the world. Its massive dome, hovering 55 meters above the marble floor, was supported by a ring of windows that made it appear as though the dome was suspended from heaven by a golden chain. When envoys from the Kievan Rus visited Constantinople in the late 10th century, they were taken to a liturgy at the Hagia Sophia. They later reported back to their prince, stating, "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor or such beauty." This profound cultural soft power led directly to the Christianization of the Slavic world, drawing them into the Byzantine orbit. The religious authority in the city was the Patriarch of Constantinople. While he answered to the emperor, his theological influence stretched across Eastern Europe. However, this period also saw the deepening of a theological and political rift with the Pope in Rome. Disagreements over papal authority, the wording of the Nicene Creed, and liturgical practices steadily grew. This tension culminated in 1054 with the Great Schism, a formal, mutual excommunication between the Eastern and Western churches that permanently fractured Christianity, a divide that remains unresolved to this day. Between 800 and 1100 AD, while Western Europe slowly pulled itself out of a long period of fragmentation, Constantinople burned as the brightest beacon of classical civilization. Behind its impregnable walls, Roman law was preserved and updated. Greek literature and philosophy were meticulously copied by monks. Complex economics, statecraft, and monumental architecture thrived in a world that had otherwise forgotten them. It would take centuries for the city's fortunes to finally wane. The devastating betrayal by Western Crusaders in 1204 permanently crippled the empire, and eventually, the legendary walls that had stood for 1,000 years would be shattered by Ottoman cannons in 1453. Yet, the fall of the city sparked the flight of Byzantine scholars to Italy, carrying with them ancient Greek and Roman texts, a migration of knowledge that directly fueled the Western Renaissance. Constantinople did not just survive while Rome fell. It preserved the very foundations of Western civilization until the rest of the world was ready to receive them again. Today, the emperors, the chariot factions, and the Varangian guards are gone. But beneath the modern streets of Istanbul, in the foundations of its oldest walls, in the underground cisterns, and within the mighty dome of the Hagia Sophia, the heartbeat of the Roman Empire echoes still.